is JS Party, your weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. Connect with us on the Fediverse. We're JS Party at changelog.social. On Twitter, we're at JSPartyFM. And on YouTube at youtube.com/changelog, where we host our live shows, post clips and highlights from all of our pods, and other cool videos you don't want to miss. Special thanks to our partners at Fastly for shipping JS Party super fast all around the world. Check them out at fastly.com. And to fly.io. Host your app servers and database close to your users. Smart, right? Don't worry, no ops are required. Learn more at fly.io. Hello, everyone. It is JS Party time. I am Jerod, your internet friend, and I'm joined today by Amel. What is up?
Hey.
Nick Nisi's here. What's up, Nick?
Hoi, hoi.
K-Ball is also here. What is up, K-Ball?
Hey, hey. Glad to be here.
Today, we gather to talk about what's new and poppin'. And the answer is lots of AI things. Holy cow. I'm a little bit overwhelmed, honestly. Both of the speed of quote-unquote innovation, but also just the amount of people talking about it. So apologize, I guess, in advance for adding to that list. But we're talking about what's new, and honestly, the biggest news to drop this week, as we record March 23rd, as you listen to this produced a week later, hopefully there's not a bunch of other new stuff that makes this stuff irrelevant by then, is GitHub Copilot X. Or is it GitHub Copilot 10? I don't know. Were there 9 previous versions, or is this X? What's your hot take, Amel?
I think it's X. Yeah. I mean, X is like 10 is so lame. I mean, who needs to like increment by number anymore? I mean, it's all about the mystery and the the intrigue of X.
Every Apple fan who's been on OS 10 for 20 years is...
And they've been making us call it that, even though it's an X every time.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Roman numerals. What? Why? Why are we doing those? Didn't the Roman Empire fall? I mean, can we use regular numbers? I don't know. But GitHub's using X, and I think they mean it to mean X, even though this is kind of like the second major release of GitHub Copilot. They're calling it the AI-powered developer experience, and some pretty epic improvements over what we know and love. First of all, anybody here a daily Copilot user, even previous to this announcement?
I am.
Nick is?
I am, for sure.
Okay. How do you use it? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? This is prior to X, just up until that point.
Well, Jerod, I use it in a little editor called Vim, or NeoVim, which means I use the most bare bones version of it probably, because I don't get the code brushes thing. I assume that all of this Copilot X stuff is not on the at least initial MVP for Copilot X. And so I just use it to get me some simple autocompletes, and usually I like it.
Okay. And is he the only one? Does anybody else use it? I do not use it.
Yeah, I played around with the preview, and that's about it. I haven't ever worked anywhere that has allowed it.
Was I supposed to ask?
Probably, but I mean, depending on the size of your company, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And now, for what it's worth, I mean, that's probably been the most, I think the biggest obstacle for many people that I know is that like they're not able to leverage it at work. They can only use it like on their own little Tinker projects. But maybe Microsoft Office will like change the law so that like, they'll just bundle it into like enterprise packages everywhere. I don't know.
What is the exact reason for disallowing it?
It's just that like it's closed source code, and they don't want to have the model unintentionally, use closed source code for training.
I don't think it does.
Got it. So they don't want to feed it back to GitHub.
Basically, correct. And there's no guarantee that that's not going to happen.
And I'm sure there's a lot of telemetry or something that's being passed back and forth to gauge how it's working and things like that.
And K-Ball, you don't use it because you don't write code anymore, right? You're like a high level guy now.
I know. I've been writing very little code recently, which actually probably makes me a good audience for this because I'm getting out of practice. And so why get back to writing code when I can just tell GitHub Copilot to write it for me?
Right.
I've been using 11D, but that's about all I'm coding in
for your new website and stuff. That makes sense. So up until now, Copilot has basically been like autocomplete on steroids, right? You give it some instructions, you tell it to do its thing, it's going to spit out some code. This new version very much is integrating what came out after Copilot and took the world by storm last November, which was ChatGPT. That was 3.5. Now GPT-4 has come out, better, stronger, faster, bigger, I don't know. And Copilot now with Copilot X, which is going to give it to you, a new AI powered developer experience. They put a Chat GPT like thing right inside the editor. And so this seems like a logical next step for me. I don't use Copilot, but I do hop over to GPT to say, hey, how do I do this thing? Because it tends to be faster than Googling if it gets it right the first time, slower than Googling if you have to correct it a couple of times.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to use that as kind of before I go Google it, I will ask ChatGPT, how do I do this regular expression? I don't remember. And it gets it right once or twice. But it is still that context switch. So having it right there in your editor, I think, would be a pretty big win, especially since it's going to be GPT-4 and probably like prompt engineered in order to give you better answers than what you do yourself, right?
I think it also like flips the model of how we like go about solving these problems, or have in the past at least. Because if you like, let's say you're running into a coding problem, you're getting this weird error or something, you have to like try and take a piece of that problem that you're getting and genericize it enough to search for it, hoping that you might find someone who has also been in a similar-ish situation. Where with like ChatGPT, you can like write out like paragraphs of like, I'm doing this with, this version of this product and this together. And I think the two of them coming together, like you can be very specific or like add as much context to your specific problem, knowing that no one's actually reading it, but like you're describing it.
Do you know that?
No, but I assume, I hope so. But you can describe it like I'm using these things, and it can really like tie into the context a lot better than you having. So it's like the opposite of having to like make it as generic as possible to try and find the most specific answer to, this is my environment, this is what I'm doing, help me figure out what's going on. And it's a lot closer to that, where it's just kind of going to figure it out, or help you figure it out at least.
One of the things I saw looking at Copilot that I thought was really interesting was less about when I'm writing new code, but more about understanding existing code. Because even when I was writing code for a living, rather than doing more process and coaching and other things for a living, I probably spent 5 times as much time reading code as writing code, if not more. I have a bug I'm trying to trace down. Well, let me understand what this module is doing and understand what that bizarre structure is there for and things like that. And one of the things they're talking about is you can ask Copilot, can you summarize this code block for me? Summarize this function, explain what it's doing. That to me seems like a huge potential productivity boost. Even if I never use Copilot to write a line of code, if it can help me understand code that exists as I'm exploring it, learning it, doing things, like that's huge.
Yeah, that's mega huge. I mean, it feels like onboarding for software engineers may have just completely changed. Because like that deep arcane knowledge that you need to understand all these different modules is now kind of like just you have somebody that's there to explain it to you, right? So you don't have to be reliant on like that domain expert to kind of coach you along your onboarding process. And so that's huge. I think the other thing that was really exciting is the pull requests, like being able to kind of leverage it for pull request summaries and, just say, hey, Copilot : summary, and then Copilot will edit your thing just to describe it. I mean, that's huge as well.
Right. Yeah. So Copilot, just to summarize this, Copilot isn't really one thing. It's kind of a suite of tools that GitHub is building into various aspects of their products. So the Chat GPT in your editor, that's obviously a VS Code thing, right? Also Visual Studio. So it's GitHub provided if you're using VS Code or Visual Studio. If you're using NeoVim, obviously you might have other GPT tools, but they're not going to be GitHub's, etc.
Well, the one I use is GitHub's.
It is GitHub. So that's GitHub Copilot, but doesn't have the new chat stuff in it?
No, not yet.
Right.
It's just waiting for whoever wrote the plugin to incorporate it, though, right?
Right. So get on that, Nick. It's open source,
Is
man.
the plugin open source? Yeah, I was going to just say.
It is.
I'm sure it is. NeoVim. It's got to be,
Is
right?
the API open and documented?
Probably not.
It's probably brand new and moving very quickly. Wouldn't GitHub Copilot just document itself? Then there's what Amel said, which is the pull request thing. Now, this is built into github.com, right? This is now built into the service. And like you said, Amel, really cool stuff, summaries, other ways that they're making pull requests better. And then the third thing that they talked about as part of this is AI-generated docs, which could be game-changing. The other thing that I've noticed is GPT-4 specifically has such a big memory space that you can insert so many tokens into that thing that it can keep contextually aware that you can actually paste in like an entire project's documentation and get answers about it. And so it's kind of for docs that aren't that great or docs that didn't previously exist, obviously having some help is going to help, right? Right, K-Ball?
So one thing that occurs to me here that is, I'll say a danger. I'm not sure it's a danger, but it's something to keep in mind is if ChatGPT is summarizing a pull request or it's generating documentation based on the code, it's living in the land of the what. What is this thing? And one of the things we've talked about on other shows around documentation and pull requests is if you're at that same level of context as the code, it's actually not that useful. What you really want is the why. Why are we making this change? Why is this code here? Why are we doing this? And what is the mental model? And it's less clear to me that something that is looking at the code and summarizing it, no matter how good that summary is going to be able to give those motivations and that higher level mental model.
Mm-hmm. Certainly can't replace outright. I think when it comes to the what and the how, it's going to really get you further than having nothing, which is where a lot of these projects leave people. Is going to be very spectacular. It's like, okay, how do I use this library? Well, there's like this little README that shows a few things, but that's like, covering maybe 20% of the surface area. And we can generate the rest. And that will get me to the how. I still probably don't understand the why and these other things. And so maybe the developer has to come around and do that. Maybe that's a pull request by a contributor who's using the library, then says, hey, this docs was a good start, but here's why it works this way. And so this will always be, I'm not going to say always because that's a long time, but this will be very much human augmented kind of things. But I think from zero to something in a lot of cases is such a big win.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential in tools like this and not specifically this. Like I do think it's interesting that it can like generate docs for you and pull requests. I would love it to go through every pull request review or pull review I've ever done and then start doing them in my style from now on. Like,
make your decisions for you.
Nickbot made a first pass and here's all of these nitpicks that I usually do.
Right.
That'd be pretty cool.
Nickbot, I like that.
But then you're forever stuck in your ways. What Nickbot should be allowed to grow and evolve. Yeah.
Well, you train it. You train it as we go, like we do with the real Nick. We're training them as he goes.
You can merge people. Be like, all right, take all of Nick's pull requests and all of Amel's pull requests and merge those styles together.
Oh wow!
Oh.
Wow, fusion
For the most epic of bots.
Yeah,
It becomes sentient between tabs and spaces, and then
A bot would be really easy for me because I just put LGTM on everything and hit the merge button. So
Jerod style. Looks good to me. Did it pass CI? No? Oh, well.
We'll find out what happens in production.
it is really interesting, like where all, like, I mean, this has been a huge week. Copilot, maybe it was last week where the other Copilot was introduced, which I've already had to clarify. No, I mean GitHub Copilot, not Microsoft Copilot.
Right. This is like Microsoft Copilot now, right?
Yeah. It's in the Office suite of products now, with the same branding.
Well, GitHub is owned by Microsoft, right?
It is.
So.
I just, it's confusing. You know, I've already had to clarify once, like, oh, I think this this Copilot stuff is really cool. And then I had to go back and put parentheses, GitHub Copilot stuff. Because I haven't opened Office in years. But yeah, it's interesting. And I think that the AI's coming to meet you where you're at in your documents or in your, like being in the Microsoft suite of products is huge because that is the entryway into all of these businesses that are too afraid to actually bring it in with like GitHub Copilot, for example. But like bringing it in and being like, oh, I see that you were writing this document over here and this over here. Let's put those together. And here's a bunch of pretty charts that I randomly generated and blah, blah, blah. Like bringing the context of what you're working on to where you're working on it at and seeing that come through with code as well is just really interesting. I see like examples of this elsewhere too with like, we've talked to like Fred Schott about the Houston.astro.build and the way that that's just trained on Astro's docs and can respond to, more context specific questions that you have about Astro. That's amazing. What if you could have that just everywhere for anything? Be like, all of a sudden I have this book I read. Let me ask questions and it will answer in the style of one of the characters or the author or whatever. It's really cool.
That is a really interesting idea, what you just said.
Is that easily achievable today? Like if I could I take a stock llama or some sort of model that's just like a text model and train it on a subset, like fine tune it against, for instance, our transcripts. So like each of you have a personality that exists inside our transcripts. All you got to do is grab them all and search for the name, like the lines that start with your name. And you have like a lot of text of things that you've said over the years. And then could you just fine tune it and have a Nick Nisi chat bot that just says ahoy hoy every time you're asking something?
Looks like you're working on TypeScript.
Well, ahoy hoy, it's TypeScript.
Not only that, you have what we've said, but you also had what we said it in response to, right? So you are able to train the prompts piece as well, not just our voice.
To answer your question, I think that does. I mean, that's what Houston did, right? They used something called LangChain. I don't understand it, but I went and looked at it because I had this wild idea of like, what if we could siphon everything out of Slack and everything out of Confluence, throw it all into this AI, and then I could just ask questions about my business and know everything or know nothing, which I currently have. So I wouldn't be any worse off.
This idea of kind of Copilot as a brand, right? I think it very genius on Microsoft's part to kind of like just start to use Copilot as almost like a verb, and a noun, right? Like the way Google became Googling, right? And so it's like genius, but also like the idea that like you can now just like democratize kind of like assistive learning, right? And you can immediately kind of quote unquote scale up your organization's productivity. I mean, that's a very smart business sell. And so I'm really eager to kind of see from companies that start adopting this, what's it going to be like, for them? Because I do think like it would be really nice to actually see feedback from the wild on this, specifically around like, how has this actually really impacted your business, and hopefully for the better. But, it is,
Well, and we're in this rapid explosion of possibilities here. And we're seeing it in the code space, right? Copilot, I think, both for code and then for code or for macros in Excel and things like that. I saw that SourceGraph is doing something similar. But I wonder about, to your point about the business intelligence, all of these companies that maintain corpuses of docs for companies, right? Like Google has Google Docs for anybody who's paying for the Google suite. Like they've got all their docs in one place, feed that into an LLM, and can I query against it in sort of an ad hoc way? Any company selling like business wikis or things like that. Who else is containing all of business knowledge? Or going back to your example, Nick, of books, it got me thinking like Amazon has the text of all these books between Kindle and their search inside the book feature. Like they have scanned all of these books. Mm-hmm. They could set up these models to be like, I want to ask this book a question.
Now we're running into the problem that we always run into though, with this future utopia of wonderful things where everything is interconnected and knows about each other, except it's everything in this ecosystem knows about it and in this ecosystem, but they can never intertwine.
Right.
Yes.
In these silos, these competing silos. Yeah, totally. So to speak to the name, Amel, you said Copilot's a great brand. I agree with you. I think that's really cool. if I was Microsoft, I would have done exactly what they did. Like just take it and move it over here, right? You got GitHub Copilot, and now it's like, well, we're just going to keep using Copilot, all the things. That got me to thinking about the next release, right, of GitHub Copilot, because they already did X, you know. They're not going to go Y, so they're probably going to go XX, right? So about a year from now, GitHub Copilot XX. But you got to stop there, right? They're not going to go XXX.
GitHub Copilot NSFW.
Oh my God.
They can't go there. It's against Microsoft's brand. So what they can do then, eventually, the biggest release is you remove the co, right? Now all of a sudden it's GitHub Pilot.
Oh.
See you later, humans.
Actually, so speaking of that, Jerod, there is, so for those of us who may be worried about like, hey, I don't want my code being used to make this thing smarter or whatever. Salesforce has come out with, Salesforce has taken the code gen model and done a bunch of training on it and open sourced it. And you can put together this thing called Faux Pilot, where you run basically GitHub's a Copilot-like thing on your own stack, on your own servers, and you basically can own the stack and own the integration. And so that does exist, and that was kind of like a thing that was people were talking about on Hacker News earlier this week, you know. And similarly, you know, we talked a lot about Microsoft. Google's like very much in this space now as well. On like last Tuesday, March 14th, they announced, you know, G Suite and AI are like gonna have a baby and it's coming to you, you know. And so eager to kind of see them kind of compete for this, you know, in this domain as well.
Right. Well, speaking to that point, so big tech, they're all making moves now. And, you know, Nick talks about this future where everything is siloed. That's kind of the big tech model. Open source is striking back, though. Mozilla announced maybe just today, maybe yesterday, Mozilla.ai, which is a startup and community building trustworthy and open source AI. There are efforts in order to democratize the technology. We had on the changelog a fellow named Georgy Gerganov who took Whisper, which is OpenAI's Whisper, and Llama, which is Facebook's Llama model, and he wrote C and C++ programs that take the models and allow you to run inference on the edge, on commodity hardware, on CPUs, really letting you run it on your own stuff. And so there are like cool things going on in addition to, or maybe against, the big players who are, of course, making big moves: Microsoft, Google, Facebook / Meta, Salesforce, etc. So there's so much going on in the space. It is hard to track.
That is amazing, like right there by itself, because if I understand correctly, that Llama CPP is basically equivalent to ChatGPT 3, and it can run on your MacBook. That's
right.
Quite amazing.
Yes, it is. I mean, so it's 3. So it's like it's a step behind state of the art, but at a certain point, state of the art gets to be pretty stinking good, right?
Yeah.
And you can go a long ways with a little. So I think there's a lot of interesting things going on for us little guys too, to where we can, you know, leverage this on our home projects, on our hobbies, in our small businesses, without having to just saddle up to the bar and, you know, give our credit card over to the same companies that always take our credit card.
I will note that Mozilla AI was incorporated as a for-profit and funded by their for-profit arm, not as
was it?
Not as a foundation funded by their foundation.
Way to ruin it, Cable.
Yeah, thanks, Cable. I felt so good about it. That whole thing is so murky, the whole nonprofit, for-profit split there.
Well, and you get OpenAI doing the same thing, right? They started their nonprofit. They're doing it for the world. Oh, we're going to close this. We're going to close this. We're going to spin up this for-profit.
Right.
I mean, there's so much money flowing into this space right now, and there's so much opportunity here that everybody's just trying to make a buck.
Where's Apple?
No, they're just going to come out with the most sophisticated AI like in October.
I feel like Apple has never been good at software, though.
Oh, yeah.
I think Apple's waiting for WWDC, in which they're going to relaunch Siri, and it's going to be good, finally.
I mean, I hope so.
It'll be Syria.
Siri.ai.
If they just basically put ChatGPT 3 into Siri, like that would be like 1,000 steps above where they're at.
They have embraced Stable Diffusion, which is interesting. You know, making ways that you can run it on their devices using the GPUs and stuff, so it's cheap and energy efficient. And that's a non-Apple kind of move. So that either says that they're playing catch up and they're behind, or they're maybe changing the way they look at these things. I don't know. Apple's been so silent on a lot of this stuff. I think they're waiting for WWDC, which is in June, which is when they usually make a lot of their announcements.
Agreed. And I think that like that's probably their play. It's probably a safe assumption that that's their play, is that running on their hardware fits into the narrative that they have about being the secure platform. Because if it's all local, you're not sharing that data out anywhere. Whether that's actually true or not is another story, but it does fit with their motive or their perceived motives.
Well, and as you mentioned, you can run Llama CPP on a MacBook, right? So imagine now they release a way to have a very tuned version of that you're accessing the GPUs, and they lean into like their chips are now the dominant chips out there.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of chips, I mean, so NVIDIA is another company that's taken this really sharp pivot from like, we don't want to be this company that's just supports fancy gaming and graphics. Like we want to power the AI revolution. And they've really like heavily invested in all these new chips that are going to be, used on all these, like in different capacities to power the new revolution. And I'm curious, like where Apple being this like closed system, like where do they fit into that spectrum, right? Like, is it like developer machines or is it like, everyday machines are going to require that level of compute power because everyone's going to be running like 7 different pieces of software that have their own, all these different things happening. I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see like where they land on that. But NVIDIA's gotten really serious about this space as well.
Everybody's interested. Adobe as well is doing some cool stuff. K-Ball, you linked into the doc Firefly. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's basically, this generative AI on images, but integrated into Adobe's imaging tools. So you can say, okay, I like this image. Give me something like it. Give me variations they were talking about. Tinker with this, clean up that. So it's still like beta. I haven't played with it myself. I was just reading about it, but it seems to be trying to take this Copilot-esque model and apply it to image software. And if anybody's going to do it, Adobe's the one to do it because they have now, after purchasing Figma, they have all the design tools in their pockets.
Right. They also have been doing some stuff in audio. So they have some new podcasting stuff they're working on, and they have a tool called Adobe Enhance, I believe, where you basically drop it, a WAV file or an MP3, and it's going to AI enhance that audio, removing echoes, background noises, et cetera, and it's so good so far that we've been dropping a lot of our files into it just as a first step towards our editing process, especially with a guest whose track is particularly noisy or something. It just does a really good job of EQing and removing a lot of that stuff so that we don't have to futz as much with the different settings and effects inside of Audition. It's kind of primed for us. So that's like brand new not brand new to us as of like 2 weeks ago. And it's so good at just making stuff sound better that it's like, why not just drop all the things in there before we start editing? It's really nice.
Do they have anything for video?
No, they have a brand new tool that's going to compete with like Riverside and Zencaster. It's called Adobe Podcasting. It has a name. It's like Shasta. That might not be right, but it's something like that. And it's in like private waitlist beta, but it's really slick. It's kind of like Descript. I would say it's closest to Descript, but it seems like it's audio only, which I think at this phase of the game, I think video to a certain extent is table stakes for a tool like that. Even if podcasters don't care about it, most of them do anyways. So yeah, Adobe is definitely doing some interesting new tools with these tools. Should we switch gears or should we stick? Do we have any more to say on the AI front, or should we switch to a different story?
I have a question.
Okay.
Just with the advent of all of this kind of AI everywhere and Copilot specifically, apparently I'm the only one who's using it.
Yeah.
But if I were to go interview at a company and one of you were the ones interviewing me, would you let me use Copilot? Would you restrict me from using Copilot? What would your thoughts be on that?
Ooh, I think that's a good question for Mel to answer.
Oh man. I mean, I think we just, as an industry, we have to kind of make a decision on, are we querying or testing on somebody's ability to get the job done, or are we like testing are we interviewing them for their ability to
Regurgitate.
retain and memorize information, right? And so get the job done or not. And so, I mean, it's a balance. There's a fine line, right? I think it's important to understand what your Copilot is spitting out, and also being able to debug it and scale it and modify it, et cetera. And so I think, this is just one of those things we're going to have to learn the hard way, I think, like where we find that balance and where we draw that line. Like, I think it's still a little too early to say.
I have a different question. At what point do you fail that interview if you don't use Copilot?
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
That's the question that Microsoft executives want.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a Copilot-like tool, because there's tons of them coming out, right? Like everybody's trying, this space is, right now it might be GitHub Copilot is the way, but I mean, at this pace we're going, next week, there will be 3 more, right? It is very fast. But I think I'm tired of AI. Feels like all the time, AI. And I'm just like, I, you say it faster. Ay. So much AI. But this has the potential to skyrocket productivity in the software industry. And I think as scary as it is adapting to that type of rapid change, there's also just tremendous potential there, because there are so many problems. As soon as you get out of the tech world and you like go and see what people are doing in the world, you're like, that could be solved by software. That could be solved by software. That could be solved by software. And they're not attacked. Problems all over the world that are not attacked because we don't have enough software developers. Well, if a software developer is 10 times more productive because they can use AI tools to do all the boilerplate and all this and all that and whatever, how much cooler of a world do we get to?
Let me put it in totally non-controversial terms here. Absolutely no controversy here at all.
Okay.
This AI is a lot like Tailwind, where you have to know CSS really well to effectively use Tailwind, but it's just going to keep you on rails, keep you focused, and let you be productive.
Can I take my mic out and drop it for you?
That says it right there.
I mean, honestly, though, I think that's like the fancy marketing message, right? I think this is going to be a learning curve for all of us. Like, I really do, because I think like it's going to be like, oh, well, if I don't have to, why should I, right? Don't forget, like, developers are like, we are inherently lazy. That's a good thing, right? We conserve our mental energy. So, like, where do you draw the line for like what you need to know and what you don't need to know? I think that's just where it gets murky, and I think that's where like we're gonna have to learn the hard way, I think.
Hello, friends. This is Jerod here to tell you about Changelog++. Over the years, many of our most diehard listeners have asked us for ways they can support our work here at Changelog. We didn't have an answer for them for a long time, but finally, we created Changelog++, a membership you can join to directly support our work. As a thank you, we save you some time with an ad-free feed, sprinkle in bonuses like extended episodes, and give you first access to the new stuff we dream up. Learn all about it at changelog.com/++. You'll also find the link in your chapter data and show notes. Once again, that's changelog.com/++. Check it out. We'd love to have you with us. It's now time for me to take a bathroom break and for Nick to talk about
his beloved TypeScript. Oh, God. Good use.
Nick?
For the record, all of you audience listeners out there, I did not put this in the document. It was all Jerod. So as he takes his bathroom break, I want you to know that.
He set you up, Nick. He's setting you up for success. What a friend.
I know, right?
I can't even defend myself because I'm in the bathroom. So that's not fair. Go ahead, Nick. TypeScript 5.0.
Yeah, it came out.
That's a big number.
It's official. It's exciting. One note, though, on TypeScript releases is that they don't actually follow SemVer. 5.0 is just what came after 4.9.
They're just too cool for school, or what?
I found a thread. I'll try and link it for the show notes on GitHub where Ryan from the team was talking about like basically like they're constantly fixing and updating types for like standard libraries and things like that every release would be a breaking change. And so they just don't follow that.
But 5.0 doesn't follow 4.9. 4.10 follows 4.9, Nick.
Not in their counting. They're like
Decimal notation. You're going up by 0.1 each time.
Microsoft's 4.10 is like Valve's 3. They can't count to it. And so they just have to roll over.
When are we going to get TypeScript X? That's what I want to know.
I think like the improved decorator support and
official decorator support.
Like, yeah. And what do you call it? Alignment with the spec and all of that. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's big. That's big enough to like warrant a major version. Like,
Is it though?
A fake major
Is
version.
it though?
Since we know that they're not really real though.
I'm sure it is for all of the Angular developers out there, but anyone
Right.
else, is anyone else using decorators for anything?
I don't think anyone else is. I think I mean, at scale anyway, I think it's just pretty big in Angular, like you said.
I could be getting my history wrong, but I think that at one point, like in the early days, like the reason we have experimental decorators is because Google actually wanted to fork TypeScript and call it @script specifically to add decorators support. And instead, the compromise was no, experimental decorators flag. And here we are.
Nick, now that we're alone, can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
How much did it hurt your heart?
From the bathroom, Jerod?
Now that we're alone here in the bathroom, how much did it hurt your heart recently when you heard two of your programming heroes, Dan Abramov as well as Zach Leatherman, take anti-TypeScript stances right here live on the JS Party podcast? How much did your heart hurt when you heard those things?
Unbreak my heart, say you love me again, undo this hurt you caused when you walked out the door and walked out of my life, uncry these tears.
You know, at points in all of our lives, we're all misguided. And some people are just misguided at different times than others. No, I totally respect that. And that's fine. It is funny though, because I was just having this conversation today that like when someone says that, you know, they write JavaScript, it's just assumed to me that they are actually mean TypeScript. And is that the case for you all as well?
I feel like when people tell me they use TypeScript, it's kind of like when you do CrossFit, you know, or you go vegan, like you got to tell everybody about it. So like, no, if you say JavaScript, I assume you're using JavaScript, because if you're using TypeScript, surely you're going to have a .ts on your t-shirt or something.
Wait, you think the TypeScripters are the vegans in this scenario?
I'm not going there. I'm not touching that one.
I think it's going to depend a lot on what part of the industry you're hanging out in.
Yeah.
If you're in Silicon Valley or a startup or something like that.
Silicon Prairie.
If you're in Silicon Prairie, you and all 5 other developers are probably using TypeScript. But you know, if you're working doing software development in a non-software company with legacy code that's probably been there for 10 or 15 years, you may or may not have gone through the work to upgrade to TypeScript, because you got a whole mass of existing JavaScript to deal with.
Absolutely. And like, we should be humbled by that. I go in assuming that when you say you write JavaScript, you're actually writing TypeScript. But like at the same time, I need to remember that still 80% of the top 100,000 sites have jQuery on them, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, most software is legacy software, right? Like almost nothing's greenfield. Like very few projects have started in the last 12 months, even though there's probably a lot, but relative to the amount that exists already, it's minuscule. So that, yeah, those things move very slowly. And in our area where we live in, you know, kind of on the edge, I guess, early adopters, you know, part of the scene, we see all the new hotness and we adopt it. And, you know, we expect everyone's just right there with us. I think I was talking with Liz Rice recently about even just Kubernetes adoption on that side, on like the CNCF side of the world, on the ops side. And like how long, you know, it feels like Kubernetes is like everywhere and everybody's using it. And it's like, really though, like go to these conferences and like so many companies are like still evaluating if this is, and which is what you should do, if this is right for them. But like so many of us just assume like, yeah, of course, you're going to be using the newest React version, which we could switch topics to if you guys want.
Wait, so I just had a thought though. So if you're in one of those legacy companies, in a legacy project, you got all this vanilla JavaScript that it would be such a pain to upgrade to TypeScript. Can Copilot just do that for you?
I don't know about Copilot, but ChatGPT could just paste it in there. What could go wrong?
Just paste it in there. We need a t-shirt that says just paste it in there. I love that.
Yeah, just paste it in. That's like Nick's new motto.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel like we're like underestimating that though. Like, I think a lot more teams have been like adopting and or have adopted TypeScript. Like, I think most teams working on even just a portion of like maybe this is legacy software, but like maybe the newer parts are in TypeScript, right? Because there is interoperability. I don't know. I've seen pretty wide scale TypeScript adoption across the board for most people and companies that I know of. Of course, there's parts of the legacy software that maybe isn't getting touched that is in JavaScript, but it does feel like the new normal in a way that isn't new normal for code that's in active development. Maybe that's the prefix.
Right.
So.
Well said. I think speaking to that point, my particular comparison, like it's a lot easier to incrementally adopt TypeScript because of the superset and because of the fact that you can do it on a project by project basis than it is to like roll out a Kubernetes cluster. Like that's a much bigger thing to adopt. So
bigger commitment with a bigger blast radius,
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I think, did we go a little crazy with decorators and like doing a bunch of things that were totally not adhering to the spec and
enums.
Just in general, enums, some things that weren't very JavaScripty? I think yes. So I'm happy to see 5.0 like kind of more in line with JavaScript, but I think it's TBD.
Quick poll. Do we say enums? Is that what we say is enums? Because it's short for enumerator, but I also say enums. Is that normal? What do you guys
say? Enums, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not weird.
I feel like I go back and forth between enum and enum and tuple and tuple.
I hear enum sometimes. I don't know what people are talking about.
Tuple.
And then I have
tuple.
Tuple and tuple. That's another tough one.
Yeah.
Tuple doesn't sound as weird to me as enum. Enum, I'm like, what?
Yeah. But then, but enumerator also doesn't sound weird, I guess. But enumerator does.
Enumerator sounds like something you're going to eat. That's enum.
Enum kind of sounds like I guess I was going to say the nom nom thing, but I guess that'd be like enom. So I proved myself wrong as I said it.
We should rebrand them all as enumerators.
We should. Enom-nomerators.
Enumerators.
All right. Anything else on TypeScript 5? There's a little about cons. I don't know. I was in the bathroom when you were talking about this. The decorators. There's like 5 doesn't matter.
There's just general improvements. Like it's very exciting. Obviously, there's a lot of really cool things. I don't know. Like the biggest thing probably in 5 is the decorator support, which is really cool to see. Like they're keeping up with their stated goal, which is to be a typed superset of JavaScript. And so as these new features get added to the language, they add them as well. And I think that that's a really good way to have like a blessed version of the future of JavaScript that you can start using in a very typed way today. So now that they're there, you can start using them and they'll transpile down if you need to, or if you're targeting the latest environments, they'll just be there, which is great.
It's like having a polyfill built in for you.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't have to worry about like, oh, I'm using a very weird like Babel plugin that's doing this one thing that may not be standard. Like it's going to be standard and it's Microsoft behind it. So it's a big company, right? It's going to be supported. I
think that's the most compelling part of your particular argument with TypeScript, Nick, is like having just like, it's like all your tooling right there. Like it is the blessed version. And if it supports it, it supports it. You don't have to pick and choose features or etc. It's just like, well, if it's in TypeScript, I can use it. And I think that's a compelling argument.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't compel me to use it, but I think it's a compelling argument.
And going back to Dan Abramov, like I was just looking, I had to go confirm the React code base is still in Flow. I didn't know that was still a thing.
Oh.
I'm sure there's lots of Flow code in Facebook as well, just Meta. Like it's a huge code base.
It feeds into our next topic area a little bit. And particularly with the aspect of like, it feels like React is kind of moving real slow these days.
Spice emoji.
That's what we're talking about. So when we had the React team on the show, we mentioned how that like the blog hadn't been updated since last June. And their last update then was about React server components, which we know is still being discussed and kind of, you could tell that Dan's very much fleshing it out, like how the story, the narrative, like the explanations is kind of fun. I listened back to that conversation and just hearing Nick and I trying to follow along as they go and just like, am I understanding this right? And like trying to have these analogies, and Dan would be like, no, that's not exactly, a good analogy. It's very murky. It's very not clear right now to me. Maybe it's more clear to you all. React's story today is a bit murky. But they did launch, as you mentioned, our next story, react.dev, which is the new docs site, which I think has been, Amel, this is what you were talking about last year, wasn't it, with Rachel on the show? Mm-hmm. So that's really just a formalization and a public launch of what was the beta new docs. But nice to see it like finally out there.
Mm-hmm. And they're great. It's finally a legit non-beta dot whatever URL to point developers to learn modern React.
Yeah, it's super impressive. Very, even just aesthetically pleasing, but a lot of examples, a lot of guides. There's touch points for, the API, for quick start, all the things that you'd expect to be there and more. So that's really cool. But I'm curious what your guys' thought. I don't know if you guys had a chance, K-Ball and Amel, to hear the React team on the show or listen to anything they've been saying on the internets recently in light of, the SPA fatigue and the Web Development's Lost Decade episode, Amel, that you did with Alex. How do you think this is going? Where do you think it's going? What are your feels?
Yeah, I think the React team is taking the steps that they need to take in order to support like shifting needs in the community, right? Like, and I think the server story for React has just been, it's not a new thing. It's, we've seen many iterations of this, but I think, the missing ingredient has just been like making this an important piece of the core library and like investing improvements and making it really performant. And that's what's been missing, which I think is being addressed now. I think having a path or providing a path for people to easily switch from client rendered to server rendered, and making that seamless for teams that have large code bases. I mean, those are all really great things. So very excited to see that investment. And yeah, I can empathize and understand if they're still figuring it out or if it doesn't make sense, or, it's a small team that's serving a big community, and
totally.
And, there's architectural decisions that also need to, that take time to kind of undo or decompose, so.
K-Ball, you?
Yeah, I think React is running into the incumbents challenge of they have a massive pile of history. They have massive market share. They have tons of people using React. They have tons of can't break this. And historically they've emphasized clean upgrades and things like that. And that makes making big changes hard and slow. I mean, you look at these docs, as you said, these docs are phenomenal. They are a huge update. How long was it since hooks launched, before the docs launched?
Probably been 3 years at least.
3 years. Yeah. Because they are at the point, and this is something I've heard people at Google talk about as well. Anytime they launch a new product, they have to be ready to face 1 billion users, right? React is in this place where the spotlight is so large and the number of people depending on this is so huge that they have to move extremely slowly and extremely carefully and make sure every I is dotted and T is crossed. And what we're seeing in the ecosystem right now is that there are some needs that they are not currently meeting, that may, in some ways, I know, I don't know if Fred would say this, Fred K. Schott, certainly Mishko Hevery has said, it's by design. The sort of core architectural choices that have been made lock them in to a lot of things that make it very, very hard to optimize for minimal JavaScript and for super high performance. And so they're trying all of these things to try to address those things, but they cannot change that fundamental architecture because they have such a massive weight of usership and history. And so I think they're going to continue to do interesting things there. They're going to continue to try, but there's a huge opening right now that we're seeing filled by all these new frameworks. We're seeing tons of innovation in the framework space that we haven't seen for a while with Astro, with Solid, with Quick, that are looking at, can we change some of those fundamental assumptions and break this legacy of so much JavaScript? And so I the React team is in a really hard space. This is the classic like innovator's dilemma. They have plenty of reasons to keep going down the road that they're going. But honestly, like, I don't see what they're doing as something that's going to fundamentally change that trajectory. It will help. It will give some options for people who are locked into the React ecosystem. But I don't think that it's going to make a fundamental shift. I think to do that, we're going to need changes in the way that we think about JavaScript frameworks. And maybe those changes are already out there in one of those frameworks. I forgot to mention Svelte, but Svelte is also doing interesting things in this. Like maybe one of those frameworks is the one that breaks this trend and has enough fundamental difference to get us out of this, over JavaScript world. But I don't think it's going to be React.
But this does set them up on a good trajectory with that, I think. Like given their legacy and where they're at right now, they're still pushing forward with all of this, and then server components on top of that really adds kind of like, again, like almost a blessed route for doing that within the React ecosystem as well. Whereas something like Remix is going a slightly different way to the same goal, but this is more of this is what the React team is prescribing, and there's a lot of weight that goes along with that as well.
I will say this. I think everybody I've ever met on the React team is like top notch, amazing at what they do, like very smart and clearly driven and doing great work. I feel like they're backed into a corner to a certain degree because as we move away from client towards server, like React, like they don't have that part of the stack, right? Like it hasn't been that. And they can come up with a spec and a technology and a way of doing things, but when it comes time to providing a solution, they're like, well, Next.js has it built in. It's like, well, that's not your project, right? Like that, to me, like that was one of the things that stuck with me is how often they would say, and it's built into Next 11, which is a really great project and all that. I'm no problem with it, but like that's outside of their control. And to me, like that would be unfounded or shaky ground to be like, well, the future of React is in Next. And Next is a great partner project run by a company that is simpatico, but it seems like they almost need to have more of a holistic solution from React proper in order, I think, to bridge the gap ultimately. So I tend to lean with UK Ball, not because of the fault of any individuals or their quality of team, and I mean just spectacular, but just because of where it is and what they don't offer, because hasn't historically had to be that. Your thoughts?
I totally agree. It's not about the individuals. All right. And this is a pattern we see over and over again. Once you reach some level of incumbency, the incentives and pressures on you make it very, very hard to innovate in fundamental ways and fundamentally change your approach to things. And that's okay. Like that's the natural cycle of progress and technology. But yeah, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Well, I think that they did try and clarify that Next's implementation of server components was their implementation, and it's the most stable implementation so far. They do also have like an internally code-named one that I'm forgetting off the top of my head that doesn't use Next at all, but it relies on so much more than what they're willing to support because it's like a specific build system and things like that. And they've traditionally kind of shied away from things like that. There was a whole big debate about like, should they still be recommending Create React App as the go-to for starting a new React project? So like I get that, and it's all like an open standard that anyone else can build onto as well or choose not to.
I guess what's interesting for me is that like the problem of React is for me a slightly wider problem, which is like do everything with JavaScript, right? Like that's the generic core underlying problem, and so. It was like with the birth of React, it was like so widely adopted and it like so quickly skyrocketed. I think most people didn't, just immediately took Facebook as a brand, and said, oh, they know what they're talking about. Let's go ahead and, do this. And we'll use this regardless of whether or not it meets our use case, for what type of site we're creating. And then fast forward however many years later, it's so widely adopted. People are having problems scaling it, right? Because they're like, wait, maybe this wasn't actually for me. I feel like we, as a community, we kind of gave up. There was no discernment. There was no like evaluation for like, does this actually meet my needs? Is this the right tool? Is this the right architecture? And now we're trying to kind of like walk ourselves back from it. And it's really hard to kind of, as we're seeing, it's really hard to walk back from that kind of a situation. And I feel like we kind of gave up, like we chose DX over UX, right? Because it's like, oh, look how easy it is to use React. Look how fast it is to use React. Look how quickly it is to build.
I think that point is really key, right? So React wasn't just there because it was Facebook. It was fundamentally a better DX. And we went all in on that and walked ourselves into a hole where it makes it very hard to claw back some of those user-facing performance and other things. And that's kind of where I was trying to get to with like, there's a fundamental choice that was made in the architecture that pushes that way. And it remains to be seen from my perspective, if we can get that level of DX without that choice. There are people saying that we can. I think there's a reasonable argument that we can, but it hasn't proved out in the market yet.
Well, I think that's what I was going to say exactly, Cable, is like we leaned so heavily, I think, into JavaScript because of that DX, just as you said, Amel. And we leaned into it too far, but now I feel like the clawback is only possible because of improved DX. And I'm thinking like specifically if you take like Astro files, right? An Astro file can have like effectively build time JavaScript or TypeScript, client side JavaScript or TypeScript, and then markup and CSS all in one file. And that's really only possible because there's such a good DX story that you can tell with a custom Astro language server that knows how to parse all of that, knows what parts are what, and how to present you with all of the modern coding DX standards that you would expect in any JavaScript file. So it's because of the advent of things like that we're able to start clawing back and getting into this spot where we can have like a nice medium between really good DX and efficiently separating out our code so that a build tool now knows how to properly build it for static sites or server-side rendering, any of that.
I don't think the DX versus UX dichotomy is as black and white as perhaps it has been described, or maybe that you guys think it is. Because a lot of times, you can't say, well, we chose DX over UX, because in many cases, your ability to actually develop is the thing that creates a user experience in the first place. And how can you say like, compared to the jQuery spaghetti code that was just an unmaintainable, bug-ridden, like just messes that were happening. Like React comes in and changes the paradigm of building these things with a single directional data flow, with components that are composable, etc., that are just like way easier to develop things good and maintain. And like that produces a user experience. It's like, hey.
Totally agree.
So I don't know if it's like, a lot of times it's like this versus that. And I don't think it's quite so straightforward.
The user experiences that are on the web today are so much better than they were in the pre-React world because of what you're saying, right? Like I'm remembering there were some things that I spent weeks building in Backbone because they were too complex to do with just jQuery that would be relatively straightforward to implement now in React. So there is progress on the user experience side. I do think, once again, we've kind of locked into this model of more and more JavaScript as a way to get that. And that works okay if you're on top of the line machines and top of the line networks, and is very hard to make performant across most of what people are using. And that, like, network speeds and device speeds outside of the top of the line have not been keeping up with the pace that JavaScript has been rising. And the architectural choices that go into building a React app that are there make it very challenging to walk that back. There's things you can try to do. You can try to implement lazy loading and you can do all these things, but it's a lot of work. It's very hard to get that to work well.
I think it goes back to what Amel said with regards to, and I agree with everything you say there, with regards to kind of stop evaluating and like just use this for everything. And, I build server-side rendered applications with jQuery. And then when I saw React come out, and I was like, wow, this could really help me. And then I found an area of my application that it would really help, which was like this dynamic form builder thing where like you select these things and more elements come up and maybe you toggle this thing and then like this part of the page hides and all this kind of stuff. And I rewrote that with React and it was spectacular. It was amazing. And then I just left the rest of my application as a server-side rendered Ruby on Rails thing. And it was like, this was great. React for me was like a blessing. But I didn't throw everything out and say, now I'm going to build a SPA and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not trying to like give myself kudos. I'm just saying like that evaluation of like, okay, this is really going to help me, but I'm still going to evaluate its merits in these other areas and not just go all in. I think that's like the engineering part of the job that we all need to be doing. And we tend to be kind of lazy and just take the big hammer and hit all the nails with it, right? Like, oh, I found the panacea. This is going to solve all my problems, because it does solve some of your problems big time, but it also is going to create other problems, and it's also not going to fit in every place that you can shove it. I mean, I know there's like React-based command line builders, and it's like, okay, if you like components, cool. Like that makes sense, but why is React building your command line app? I just don't understand.
I agree with all of that. Unless you look at it from the light of TypeScript, then you can shove that everywhere, and there is no downside.
Right. Nick and his like TypeScript blanket and pillow and shirt and boxer briefs, all the above.
Yes, stick around for the After Dark where we showed Nick where to shove his TypeScript.
Oh God. Yeah. So no, Jerod, I think so. You should give yourself kudos for that. I think what you did there like demonstrated constraint, which is like what we maybe need more of in our community, right? Like I think for me, it's like businesses didn't, and this is the same point that Alex was making, Alex Russell, when we had him on our on the show a few weeks ago. Have businesses made the decision? Like, do you think that they consciously opted into like all this JavaScript and stayed on the client, like for every single use case on their platforms? Like, no, right? Like your login page, your like there's certain things that just need to be fast and they need to kind of quickly serve the user. And, we've kind of universally applied this tool that maybe just isn't the best for every single use case. And we've just put it everywhere. Right. So, I think this is where there's gaps maybe in our product ownership, like product management and, budgeting and like understanding that when we're building products, we need to think about the architecture for the use case, and that just needs to be part of how we build software. And I think that's what's missing. We're just universally applying. We're using the same tools. We're using the same little paintbrush to paint the house. We're using maybe that paintbrush doesn't work for painting a house.
Right. You need a roller or a sprayer.
I feel like it's only recently though that we can that it feels like we have options. Right, to do these other things. I mean, I don't want to go rewrite. I don't want to rewrite everything in Ruby, but like
PHP, man.
It feels like things. I keep bringing up Astro as like an example. That's like a great example of opting into. Like you could ship a React component to the client when you need it, but most pages probably don't. And that's really cool. A really easy way to get that for relatively little cost, like from a developer's perspective. But we're still like we've been building this way in like React and things like that for a long time. And we're kind of locked in a lot of ways to this ecosystem, because it's not just React, it's the tooling in React. It's the data tables and the components that we use that are all built around, the shared context, shared component lifecycle, all of that we need better options for to be able to move out. And those options are coming and they're there in other projects. It just takes time to move over to them. And I think that React seeing that and competing in their own way as well is a positive thing. Like it seems like we're trending in the right direction all around.
I agree. Should we let that optimistic high note be the final word for the day, or does anybody else have anything to add before we call it a show? We're going to let Nick have the final word, honestly.
Don't do it.
All right.
Don't do it.
I can add something.
Thank you, K-Ball, with a save.
Which is kind of to Amel's point. I think, we make trade-offs about what we're going to do in technology all the time. And businesses make trade-offs all the time. What has been missing, I think, is the realization that this is a trade-off that is being made. I think for a very long time in web years anyway, React or a React-like framework has been the way. It is the way you do it. You're going to win on how fast you can ship things. You're going to win on how nice a thing you can ship. You're going to win on your developers are going to be happy. You're going to win on you can hire people for just this one skill set. And so, when everything's motherhood and apple pie and everything's positive, there's no trade-off being made. But what we're saying now, and what I think Alex has been sounding the bell on and other things, is there is a trade-off. It's just been invisible. And the trade-off is your site is going to be so slow that if you want people who are not using top-of-the-line iPhones to use it, they won't be able to use it. If you want it to be usable in rural areas or countries without fast internet, they won't be able to use it. All of these different pieces. And that's the trade-off you're making. And if we can make that trade-off explicit and visible, and then have options where you can choose different parts of the trade-off and different layers. Okay, we're going to have a slightly more complex DX, because I think as good as Astro is, you do have to context switch a little bit more. You have to be a little bit more explicit, but we're going to have a slightly bigger trade-off there, because for our use case and for our users, that performance benefit is worth it. And that's a trade-off we're going to manage explicitly as part of our technical and business decision making, rather than implicitly because this is the way things are done.
And that, Nick, is how you do a final word.
Wait, no, I have one more thing.
No, you're done. You're done here.
Honestly, I mean, I have something that's going to tie this whole thing together, which is,
okay.
With AI shift, with the AI shift that we're doing towards like all having our little Copilot buddies. You're laughing at that. Is buddies the wrong word? Are we?
No, that's good.
Teachers, senseis, I don't know, masters.
Yeah. Wing person.
Yeah. I think it is, I wonder if this is going to hurt newer frameworks, right? Because they're, is the model going to be smart enough to work as quickly and make as helpful suggestions with Svelte and, quick as it is, React, because there's just so much more out there, right? And so I do wonder like how those two things are going to play into each other. And I hope the answer is that like the learn time, and like the time to master is just going to shorten and, and or maybe they won't need we won't need as many varied data inputs, but I hope that doesn't impede progress for us, right? Like I hope that like, oh, well, I can't use this on GitHub Pilot. I can't use this on Copilot, so therefore I'm not going to use it. It's like, I hope that doesn't happen,
I guess it depends on who Microsoft decides to bless. I was thinking about that with the TypeScript decorators. They could drive adoption just by having Copilot suggest decorators everywhere.
I mean, that's scary and also cool, but, who's making the decisions? Embrace.
Extend. And extinguish.
Extinguish.
Well, we are now ending on a very morbid thought, but we couldn't let Nick have the final word, so I'd rather give it to Amel. But I am going to end the show now. So on behalf of Amel, K-Ball, and Nick, I'm Jerod. This is JS Party, and we'll talk to you all in the next one. Honest question. Do you like these news roundup episodes? We enjoy making them, but sometimes I wonder if we're drinking too much of our own Kool-Aid. Do you prefer our guest interviews? Are we striking a good balance with our different episode formats? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from you. There's a discussion link in your show notes or holler at us on the socials. We're JS Party at changelog.social and JS Party FM on Twitter. Thank you once again to our partners for helping us bring you awesome pods each and every week. Check them out at fastly.com and fly.io. By the way, if your organization might benefit from sharing your story with JS Party's discerning, influential, and really, really ridiculously good-looking audience, get in touch. We'd love to work with you. Thanks also to our Beatmaster in residence, the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. So mysterious. Next up on the pod, Coffee Talk with Nick and K-Ball.
On this show, we talk about coffee, New York, daughter, dogs, no big whoop, just coffee talk.
Stay tuned right here. We'll have it ready for you next week.